Hello class, and welcome to the Battle of Cannae between the Carthaginian Empire and the Roman Republic. It is here where 87,000 Romans and about 50,000 Carthaginians, though again this is just an estimation, are going to be battling it out on the fields of Italy, and the Romans will have one of the most catastrophic losses they will ever see. About 50,000 Romans will not return from this battlefield, and 10,000 will be captured, and a bunch of other mishmash numbers here and there. But how did we get to this point? Well, let's take a step back. First and foremost, we are entering what we know as the Second Punic War between the Carthaginian Empire and the Roman Republic. Now, in the first Punic War, the Carthaginian Empire got its ass kicked pretty badly. And so because of that, it had lost territories in Sardinia, Corsica, and of course Sicily, which they had been battling with the Roman Republic over. One of the most prominent figures of the First Punic War was a man by the name of Hannibal Barca. He basically was one of the most prominent generals and is part of the Barcid or Barcid family, who are a noble family of the Carthaginian Empire. Now, as I said, the Carthaginian Empire will lose the First Punic War. However, that won't stop Hamilcar from continuing his duties to the Carthaginian Empire. And after the First Punic War and after the Mercenary War, Hannibal Barca will start to expand Carthage's borders across Iberia, basically, trying to mitigate the loss of Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily. And he will expand quite a massive amount, actually. However, he will have his son accompany him on these conquests of Spain. That being, of course, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal Barca is given an oath by his father to never be friends with the Romans. And during the trip of, conquering Spain, Hannibal's father, Hamilcar, is drowned in a river. I'm not entirely sure the circumstances behind that. I mean, just learn how to swim, bro. But basically, he drowns. His son takes over the mantle of top general, and he continues expanding across Spain. Now, Rome and Carthage have a little bit of agreement, basically, that you cannot expand north of the Ebro River here. So Spain is divided between a more or less Roman side and a Carthaginian side, right? Between this river here. However, there is a city by the name of Saguntum. Saguntum has a separate agreement with Rome that had existed even though they are south of the Ebro River, as you see. Now, the Carthaginians are going to sack and conquer the city. Rome is going to be pissed off because they're like, hey, we had an agreement. What's going on? They send an embassy, and bada bing, bada boom, war is basically declared. And so now Hannibal launches his plan to invade and attack Rome. You see the route over here from Saguntum. He's going to move across, go through Gaul, pass through the Alps, basically, a very famous crossing of the Alps with elephants, and then march his way through Italy and basically wreak havoc. He's going to win battle after battle, series of battles at Trebia over here, at Tresamen over here, and then finally at Cannae, which will be where our video takes place. Over here is a modern day recreation of Cannae. You can see it's like a beautiful grassland here, and I don't think there's any super big difference between modern day Cannae and ancient Cannae. Maybe there's an Italian man here and there screaming or whatever, but regardless, this is the site of Hannibal's greatest victory over Rome. The Roman Republic at this time is going pretty stir-crazy at the moment. With Hannibal wreaking havoc through their lands, basically, they are trying their damnedest to defeat Hannibal, and multiple times they lose. So because of that, Rome decides to shadow Carthage's advances into Italy, basically not engaging their army directly, but more or less harassing them and preventing them from establishing themselves there. You see, Hannibal's plan is basically to defeat Rome as many times as possible in the open field. And so because of that, they could basically weaken Rome enough that the allied city-states that have basically been co-opted, conquered, vassalized, subjugated by Rome, and allied to Rome will defect and join the Carthaginian side. That is Hannibal's plan, to make Rome lose so much that the allied city-states go, wait a minute, why don't we just join Carthage and be independent right here? And so that is basically Hannibal's plan in a nutshell, so to speak. It doesn't go so well, we do have some enemies of Rome, right? As Hannibal is traversing with his Iberian army that he got from Spain and his African army that he brought over from Carthage, he picks up some Gauls over here that hate Rome. He picks up some Celts over here that hate Rome. And then he's just going to continue marching more and more. And there will also be some allied city-states as well that will give some support. But it's not happening as of yet. Hannibal still needs to get the big victory. That's why Hannibal goes to Cannae, actually. He goes to Cannae, which is a good supply spot over here, to feed his whole army. And because the terrain in question has good natural area to get some fresh water so nobody dehydrates, and also because it's perfect for his cavalry. Hannibal has 50,000 troops, 10,000 of which are cavalry units. And so this area, this terrain over here is going to be perfect for his cavalry. Now, Rome has had enough about shadowing Hannibal, basically. So they elect two consuls, that being Gaius Terentius Varro and Lucius Aemilius Paulus. I couldn't find a picture of Lucius, so I have a picture of him dying, basically, over here. This is like an artwork. It's a little morbid. And they set out with 87,000 Romans over to kill Hannibal. That's about 30,000 more troops than him. The estimates vary. There also on the battlefield itself, some would argue that only 77,000 Romans were really engaged because 10,000 of them were just garrisoned in the Roman camp over here. But that's besides the point. Over 80,000 troops are coming after Hannibal. Hannibal is outnumbered. And the Romans have quite a military under disposal. Let me just move the camera so you guys can see. Here we have a version of the early Roman legion. From left to right, we have the Hastati, Velites, Triarii, and Principes. Now this is post 275 BCE, but it should be the same from about 216 BCE when the Battle of Cannae takes place. Of course, there's going to be some differences. I'm sure someone in the comments are going to go down below and tell me. I know from reading on Adrian Goldsworthy that the Iberian short sword was adopted by the Romans by the time of Battle of Cannae, so this version might be a little bit outdated. So just a quick intermission. I made a mistake when it comes to the swords that the Romans were using. They were using before the Battle of Cannae a Greek sword known as a xiphos that was very useful for thrusting. But Hannibal's Celt Iberian mercenary swords were useful for slashing and thrusting. And before the end of the war, the Romans would adopt this sword, and it would be called Gladius Hispanius, or a Greek term, Ibriki Makhera, and this would be used by Scipio Africanus at the Battle of Cartagena in 209 BCE. Bye. Now, the Velites are the most inexperienced of these Roman soldiers. They are just skirmishers. They throw their javelins. They run around all over the place. That's what they do. And then, of course, to the left of them are the Hastati. They are more experienced, but still the second most inexperienced Roman troops. They're more heavily armored. They've got themselves a better shield over here that's made for the manipular formations, and they're going to be behind the skirmishers in big blocks of units over here. You can see like a little bit of the deployment here. You see the skirmishers, you see the Hastati, then behind them are the Principes. They are more heavily armored, more veteran troops that come from the Hastati ranks. So they're going to be more experienced foes, and then behind them are the Triarii. They are the most experienced troops, and on top of that, they're using a type of spear that's a holdover of when the Romans used to use the phalanx. So basically, they are phalanx troops. And so when the Hastati and Principes are retreating, they are hiding behind the Triarii, who are covering their retreat, their withdrawal. In fact, there's a saying that oftentimes when things get bad, send in the Triarii. Right? So that's the Roman formation here. You see the skirmishers, you see the Hastati and Principes, the Triarii, and then you see them deploy in this checkerboard system. Basically, the formations here need a little bit of maneuvering, right? If you're going to be, ass to ass, cheek to cheek, you have your boy on your left, your boy on your right, you have your shield, you have your sword. You need to be able to maneuver, and you need to be able to maneuver within these groups of people. So what is happening is that they're breaking up into units, and then they have like a little gap to allow for some maneuverability between these different troops. And then also, between these gaps, they are filled up by the back lines. So basically, this entire formation covers all of their gaps. essentially. Now, this is an early version of the Roman formation, right? This is before the Marius reforms that we kind of know the Roman later legions to be, but that is essentially how the Roman legion works prior to deployment. And you see here an enemy formation, which is usually just a big giant blob, right? Because like, ain't nobody gonna deal with this checkerboard system over here. But it's very, very important that the Romans deploy themselves in this way to be able to maneuver and be able to maneuver their units and for their units to be combat effective, right? Now, to the left of these troops are the Roman cavalry, right? The Roman cavalry is nothing to scoff at, essentially, but it's not like the cavalry traditions of the Persians, the Numidians, all these other different peoples, right? But essentially, the cavalry is going to make up a smaller portion of the Roman Republic's army, albeit still an important portion, right? They're going to cover the flanks of the infantry units, so to speak. Now, this army, however, half of them are going to be provided by Rome. The other half is going to be provided by allied city-states that are loyal to Rome, the ones in question that Hannibal is trying to court to his side. Next, we got Hannibal's troops over here, which are made up by Iberians, Celts, Africans, Gauls, and Numidians, and all this other type of shit. Okay, we're going to explain it really quickly. First and foremost comes the Iberians. The Iberians are heavily armored troops. They come from the Iberian Peninsula. They're veteran troops. All these troops actually are very grizzled and highly experienced troops. The Romans also have experienced troops. However, there's a difference here, right? This is the Roman legion that we just saw beforehand. They are not professional soldiers. They are citizenry militias that are recruited, basically, that gain experience over time, but they are not professional soldiers. These are not professional soldiers as well, but they have been under Hannibal's and also the Carthaginian Empire's employment for so long, they have become veterans, so to speak. They are essentially, in some ways, mercenaries, but they're made up of like many different groups of people here. The Iberians are recruited from Iberia. They have similar types of swords to that of the Romans. The Celts were brought over when Hannibal was crossing through Gaul and through basically the Alps, so to speak. They are also heavily armored, but some of them have their torsos naked, basically. So they have their sword, shield, and then they're showing off their pecs. You can see armored Celt, and then behind him, unarmored Celt. Then you have the Africans, quote unquote, which are basically like North African, like Libyan and stuff like that. They come directly from Carthage. The funny thing is that from the previous battles that Hannibal has won over the Romans, these Africans are going to take the Roman gear and weaponry. It's not really clear by Adrian Goldsworthy or Livy or Polybius if they're only taking the weaponry or if they're taking the armors and the tactics as well, but they essentially take stuff from the dead and fallen soldiers that they basically defeat, right? So these African troops are heavily armored. Then, of course, we have Gallic and Iberian cavalry. They are heavy cavalry that are good for shock and awe tactics and just charging in. We have the Numidians that are more focused on hit-and-run missile attacks and harassing. And then we have the Iberian or Balearic slingers, which are just good at just destroying your skull if you ever take a slingshot and throw it at someone's head. So they're going to be really good at harassing and destroying the skirmishing lines. I thought that there were elephants in this battle. I don't know if there's an elephant in the battle. If someone can let me know, please let me know. I mean, because in this painting right here, and here, I'm going to move the camera. In this painting right here, there's an elephant. I don't, is this the one elephant Hannibal has? I don't know. All right. And when I was reading Livy and Polybius and Adrian Goldsworthy, it didn't seem like that there were fucking elephants in this battle. So I guess there's no elephants. But I don't know. I could be wrong. All right. So now that we've explained some of the background lore, let's get into the actual battle itself. Over here is Cannae. Then we have the Carthaginian camp, the Roman camp, and then the Roman lines here and the Carthaginian lines here. Now, the Carthaginians would beat the Romans to Cannae, right? The Romans would come in, they would see Cannae being taken over, they would set up a camp. They actually set up two camps, one across the river and one over here. And the Carthaginians will, I think, somewhat do the same. It's a little weird. The battle diagrams for Battle of Cannae, they're always like fucking up things. It's either like the Carthaginian camp is on the left side of the river or the right side of the river. It's always like Can we get something like standardized? There's so many maps of Cannae basically. But essentially what ends up happening is the Romans get over there, they set up a camp. The Carthaginians are also set up there. The Romans are trying to fetch water from the Alpheus River here, and Carthage and Hannibal will send out horses over here to harass and stop the Romans from collecting water. This goes on enough that it pisses off the Romans, and the Romans want to fight the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians trying to bait the Romans into a fight, basically, right? So the Carthaginians, they line up their forces here, they're waiting for the Romans, and the Romans do not come out. That's because the two consuls that the Roman Republic has recruited to lead this army, they are sharing joint custody, like divorced parents. And so because of that, during this day where the Romans are being harassed at their camp and collecting water and stuff, Lucius Aemilius Paulus does not send out his army. He doesn't take the bait. So because of that, Hannibal just goes back to his camp with his troops and just waits it out. And that pisses off the Romans, but more or less Lucius makes the right call in that sense, right? It is a trap, and we will explain why. However, like I said beforehand, he does not rule the entire army. And so the next day, then Gaius Terentius Varro will come in, and he will send out his army to attack Hannibal. Hannibal then sees that Gaius Varro is sending out his troops, and then he'll do the same, and now the battle lines are set up. So now we see the battle lines here. We have skirmishers at the front for both armies. We have cavalry units at the flanks. The difference, however, is how the infantry is set up. You see here, the Romans, they are going to forego the maneuverability of their formation, so to speak, so that they can make their formations denser. So they're going to pack in their troops more and more closely to each other, especially in the center. The Romans realize, especially Varro or Lucius, I'm not remembering who, they basically realized that in both of the battles that had been fought over by Hannibal beforehand, the Roman infantry managed to smash through the Carthaginian center. And so the Romans are planning to do the same once again here. Now, Hannibal knows this, so his plan is to thin out his troops along this huge frontier to try and match the Romans. But he's going to push his swordsmen, his Celtic and Iberian troops forward to take the brunt of the center push of the Romans, basically. This is a way for the Romans to be baited into focusing on the center only, so that the Carthaginians can attack them from the flanks. And this is how it's going to go down. So, at first and foremost, skirmishers move in, and they're going to just throw shit at each other for a good couple of hours. So when I was reading Adrian Goldsworthy, it seems like when skirmishing units fight each other, it's not like it's super effective and crazy, right? The skirmishing units are very spread out, right? They're not right next to each other, ass to ass. They're like far away from each other, and the units, like the individuals inside these units are very far away from each other. So it's very hard to actually get like solid hits, but it does a good bit of disrupting here. While this is happening, Hasdrubal, leading the Celtic and Iberian horses, are going to try and attack Aemilius's horsemen over here on the left flank, closer to the Alpheus River here. Now, something happens when Hasdrubal is attacking his cavalry units against Aemilius. The Roman cavalry dismounts. Now, this is argued over why it is that they dismount. There are multiple theories. There's a theory that there wasn't a lot of maneuverability between the Roman infantry and the river. And so because of that, it kind of like made the cavalry a moot point. There's no point in having the cavalry because cavalry are very bad in prolonged engagements. They're only good at hitting and then running away and then hitting again, right? Charge, hit, run away, charge, run away, charge, run away, charge. They're not good at staying in the fight and constantly fighting there, because then at that point you could like get knocked off your horse, you could get pulled down from other troops. It's really hard to maneuver and move around over here. So basically this becomes like a really, really, really problematic situation. So they dismount. And from the looks of it, it seems like Hasdrubal and his Carthaginian forces also somewhat dismount. It's a little weird what's happening here, actually. I try to like think of it myself, like why the Romans are dismounting and are the Carthaginians doing the same thing. But basically the Romans are waiting for the Carthaginians to attack them. Carthaginians slam into them. They fight it out. The troops are basically like in a brutal melee with each other, basically. Both sides are dismounted, and they're just going to fight it out, essentially. While this is going on, the skirmishers of both sides back off. And now the infantry units of the Romans are going to push in and attack. So now the Roman infantry advances, basically. They're going to try and dislodge the Celtic and Iberian forces. Now, when two giant infantry blocks like this are going to attack each other, they're not trying to go for the kill. Well, obviously they're trying to kill each other, but more or less what is going on in ancient battles, especially from Adrian Goldsworthy's book, is that ancient battles are fought over between who can destroy whichever unit's cohesion or morale first and foremost. That is because most deaths in ancient battles occur when one side is retreating. So during these engagements with the two infantry blocks, what's going to happen is the Romans are going to throw their missiles, same as the Carthaginians. Then the two sides are going to get up close to each other. They're going to have their shields up, and then they're going to do a little bit of a stabby, hit each other, try to survive, all that shit. And then afterwards, after a couple minutes of trying to slash at each other and stab at each other, the two sides back off, take a breather, throw any other missiles they have, and then they do it again once more. And the Romans and the Carthaginians are going to do this over and over and over again to try and get someone to collapse. Now, usually this happens when the first line ends up dying, and so then, like, if there isn't like any way of the next line to take over their spot and stuff, there ends up becoming a panic, causing a rout and causing the troops of the Romans or the Carthaginians, whoever is running away first, to get cut down when they are retreating, right? So now the Carthaginians and Romans are just going to trade blows back and forth with each other. Again, the Celtics and Iberians are going to take the brunt of this as Hannibal has instructed. And Hannibal and his brother Mago are going to be in the center here, trying to encourage his advanced troops to continue the fight, essentially. While this is happening, Hanno is going to lead his Numidian cavalry to harass Varro and his cavalry over here. Now, this doesn't actually end up as much of a bloodbath as the other cavalry battle. However, it does tie up Varro's cavalry units. So more or less, both wings of the Roman cavalry are completely unable to fight. Now, eventually, and this is disagreed upon, whether or not it's a complete rout or withdrawal, and it depends on whether you trust Polybius or Livy. In fact, the biggest source on the Battle of Cannae is Polybius, right? Who writes it 50 years after the fact. And Livy is drawing upon that information as well as like previously lost information that has come from the Battle of Cannae as well. So because of that, we don't have the full picture as if someone was at the Battle of Cannae itself. But what we do know is that the Carthaginian center line basically more or less backs off. They retreat, they are en route, and the Romans push forward. They push forward and they send out all their troops. The center of the Roman army is led by a man named Germanicus Cervellus, and so the center of the Roman army is pushing forward. They send out, and this is the biggest mistake they make, they send out all their troops to take advantage of the Carthaginian center collapsing seemingly and routing away. And so because of that, the Romans are going to just mass up and try and push into the center as much as possible. That ruins the manipular formations, which were already packed and dense enough on purpose to push forward against the thin Carthaginian lines. So now the Roman legions are basically being pushed and compressed by each other, basically, by the mass of their numbers. And they are just going to collide and fuse into each other and merge into one giant blob. So instead of there being neat, tiny like formations and very like clean maneuvers, there's just going to be one blob of Romans pushing into the Carthaginian center here. So they basically take the Carthaginian bait, even though it's argued if whether or not this is intentional or not. So now the Carthaginians are routing, but here's what's happening though. While the Celts and Iberians are routing, the Libyan infantry, right, which was on the flanks, have not been fighting at all. The Romans are exhausted from all the conflict, and the Romans are dehydrated because they didn't get any water last night because of Hannibal's efforts. And so because of that, now the Carthaginian Libyan infantry are going to turn around and basically push forward and attack the flanks of the Roman army. So now the Libyan infantry have basically turned and faced the flanks of the Roman infantry and are pushing in on the flanks of the Romans. The Romans, they are either confused because the Libyan infantry looks a lot like their Roman counterparts because of all the aforementioned stolen gear, and they don't realize the danger until it's too late. They try to form battle lines to fight the Libyan infantry, but the Libyans are completely fresh troops. And so they're going to push forward and wreak havoc on the Roman lines, halt the Roman advance. And so because of that, Hannibal is able to rally his Celtic and Iberian troops to now attack and engage the Romans here. Fuck this fucking magnet. They're going to turn around and now they're going to be the ones pushing. So now the Romans are being pushed at the front and they're being pushed at the flanks by Carthaginian infantry. While this is going on, the Carthaginian cavalry over here basically win a pretty decisive victory. They push against a lot of the Roman cavalry here and basically slaughtered them in the river, in the Alptus River, like close by. Emilius, I believe, moves to try and help the center of the Roman army here. It's again different accounts, but Hasdrubal, right? He is going to then make a maneuver to help out his boy Hanno with dealing with Varro's cavalry. So now Hasdrubal is over here flanking around the whole Roman army that's being attacked and pinned down by Carthaginian cavalry, and he's going to basically help out Hanno in pushing out Varro and his cavalry units and slaughtering them. Varro and his cavalry try to escape, and Hanno, with his Numidian cavalry, chases after the fleeing Roman cavalry here. So they're going to try, oh my fucking god, the fucking... Fuck! Ah! So as Hasdrubal is flanking around and attacking Varro's cavalry, Hanno is pushing in and also doing the same. And once they're routed, basically, and trying to escape, Hanno and his cavalry push forward and attempt to chase down Varro to the ends of the earth to make sure the cavalry is completely nullified. Then Hasdrubal, seeing that he's completed his efforts in destroying the Roman cavalry, turns around and attacks the rear of the Roman lines. Now, here's the thing. Since all the Romans were pushing forward to the center, everybody was pushing forward, including the Triarii and the Roman officers. So there's nobody in the back here to defend the exposed Roman army. And so now Hasdrubal basically clashes and collides with the entire Roman army over and over and over again, smashing into them with their cavalry. Once the cavalry units at the Alptus River are basically killed, the cavalry units that were also led by Hasdrubal basically once again join him in attacking the Roman army. So now the Roman army is basically slowly but surely being coddled together and surrounded by all these different Carthaginian troops here. Hannibal re-engages his skirmishers to help out in the fight as well. And as you can see here, the Roman army is basically completely and utterly surrounded by this point of time. Now, the slaughter is quite immense. This is a picture of the Battle of Cannae in question. There's not a lot of pictures of the Battle of Cannae. I had to really look this one up. But basically, the Romans are surrounded on all sides by Carthaginian cavalry, by the Libyan infantry, by the center infantry that had retreated from the Celts and the Iberians, and even the skirmishers are getting into the mix. Hannibal wants the entire army to be destroyed completely, and so he does so. The battle now is hours and hours of slaughter, basically. Hannibal slowly but surely chipping away and destroying the Roman infantry. The Romans are able to take some losses, but they're able to dish out losses as well against the Carthaginians. There's just so many of them. But the Romans slowly but surely are being slaughtered here in droves. They are unable to move around. They are stuck together. There's too many of them to really move around, too many of them to move their shields and fight. As soon as one line is destroyed, the next line is basically attacked almost immediately. Some troops are basically stricken with fear and terror. Other troops are unable to even move. They're suffocating, they're exhausted, they're dehydrated. They are fucked beyond all measure. Aemilius Paulus apparently dies in the conflict. That's where this picture comes in, where you see Aemilius. He's basically told by his fellow Roman troop, hey, get out of there. You're going to die. And Aemilius he's a baller. He basically fights it out to the end. And that's basically what he does. He fights it out to the end. He dies in the conflict, and all these troops here are being killed. One by one, they are being slaughtered by the Carthaginians until they're basically no more, essentially. Aemilius loses his life, and the Carthaginians gain a huge victory in the Battle of Cannae here. About 10,000 troops, I believe, are captured by Carthage, especially the ones at the Roman camp here. And there are some troops that end up escaping, especially Varro's forces, especially some forces that see the Carthaginians slowly surround the Roman army. And so because of that, they just get the fuck out of there. But more or less, 50,000 Roman lives are lost on this day. The exact numbers are different between Livia and Polybius, however, but again, that's the difference between sources, whether you believe this has more thousands or this has less thousands. But now, Hannibal basically wins the Battle of Cannae. Now, after the victory of the Battle of Cannae, a lot of Roman city-states actually do end up defecting. We see Hannibal over here marching into Capua, which is basically actually right over here, south of Rome, west of Cannae. And so you see the southern Roman city-states, some of them end up separating themselves from Rome, defecting to the Carthaginian side, allowing Hannibal to move in and rest his army up and secure some much-needed allies and support here for his continued campaign in Rome. Unfortunately, however, that doesn't really go well after this point of time. You see, while this carnage of Italy is going on, basically, Rome has already sent over forces to deal and conquer and destroy Carthage, Iberia, basically. Now, Carthage, Iberia has only lasted for about a few decades, whereas Roman control over Italy has been going on for centuries. So basically, although he gets some success in making some of the allied city-states join him, Hannibal is not very successful at getting a lot of these allied city-states to join him, basically. A lot of them still end up serving Rome, even after this amazing, massive defeat and loss of life that Rome has occurred. So even though Rome has lost tens of thousands of troops, both allied and their own, they lost consuls, like actual senators in their actual army and shit like that. Even though that has happened, they still have their alliance network still intact. However, because of the successes of the Roman army in Iberia, much of Carthaginian Spain will be lost to them and be conquered by the Roman Republic. And so now, Carthage is in a very bad situation, and so is Hannibal. Hannibal is unable to siege Rome because he doesn't have siege weapons, and because if he did so, the allied network of the Roman army would basically go and attack him while he besieges Rome. So he's fucked in multiple different ways, even though he's won the greatest victory of his entire life. And I think that about ends it, because if we go any further, then we're going to have to talk about the Second Punic War. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know if you want to see more battles, and if you want to see the Second Punic War, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you to my patrons for making this video possible. And since this video doesn't have a sponsor, it's all thanks to you patrons for making these videos even happen in the first place. So if you want to get your name on the wall and get some exclusive stuff on my Patreon, go to my Patreon down in the comment section below, or in the description below, or the top right corner, wherever you want to click on. I think I'm done with the video. Bye. Oh shit, there was still some Coke in there.